He used to be a man the world admired. Years ago, his name was printed on posters, banners, and concert halls. People waited for hours just to listen to him play. When he walked on stage, the lights felt brighter, the audience sat straighter, and the whole room seemed to breathe with his music. He was not just a pianist, he was the pianist. A man whose hands could make people cry, smile, dream. Music lived inside him like blood in his veins. Every note carried a story, every chord held a memory. He didn't just play the piano, he spoke through it. His fingers were like wings, flying across the keys with ease, with confidence, with magic. Audiences would close their eyes just to feel what he felt. Whenever the final note echoed through the hall, silence followed, not because people were unimpressed, but because they needed a moment to return to reality. But life does not always stay kind. With time, stages became smaller, applause became shorter, and his name slowly faded from conversations. At first, he thought it was temporary, just a quiet season. But seasons changed, and he changed with them. Younger performers entered the world of music, fresh, sharp, and full of ambition. Their energy replaced his presence, their names grew where his disappeared. Eventually, he injured his hand, a small accident but cruel in its effect. Doctors told him he should rest. Rest became weeks. Weeks became months, and months slowly turned into years without music. The piano keys gathered dust. Posters of his concerts hung on his wall like reminders of a life he no longer touched. He tried to move on, to accept that his brightest days were behind him, but memories of applause still lived inside him. Sometimes late at night, when the world was quiet, he would sit alone and imagine the sound of clapping, the glow of stage lights, the thrill of being seen. Those memories warmed him, but they also hurt him. Because nothing in his life felt that bright anymore. People stopped calling him for concerts. Old friends became busy. Fame slipped away like sand through his fingers. He became just a name in history, not forgotten but no longer celebrated. When his photo appeared in magazines, people said, "Oh, he was good once," as if his greatness was only a past tense. He aged quietly. His shoulders bent a little more each year. His hands, once strong and steady, now shook slightly when he reached for a cup. He lived a peaceful life, but peace sometimes felt like silence, and silence sometimes felt like loneliness. Still, inside his heart, something small continued to burn like the last flame of a dying candle. A part of him refused to let go. He missed music the way one misses air. But every time he touched the piano, a fear held him back. Fear of failing, fear of disappointment, fear of discovering that he was no longer the man he used to be. He would sit on the piano bench sometimes, staring at the keys without playing a single note. His fingers hovered above them, trembling slightly as if asking, "Are you still mine?" But he never answered. He simply closed the lid and walked away, convincing himself it was easier not to try. Because trying meant risking loss, and he had lost enough already. Yet even without playing, music followed him. In the rustle of leaves, he heard violins. In the rain against the window, he heard soft piano scales. In every quiet room, he felt melodies forming inside him like ghosts. Music was not gone, it was trapped, waiting for him to open the door again. He lived like this for years, between memory and silence, between pride and regret. People still recognized him sometimes on the street, but not with excitement. They smiled politely, nodded, and walked past. He was not a legend anymore, just a story. But despite the quiet life, despite fading fame, despite weak hands and heavy heart, he never truly stopped being a pianist. Because being a pianist is not about stages or applause. It is about the soul behind the sound. And though the world no longer watched him, music still lived inside him, waiting, sleeping, patient as time itself. He didn't know it yet, but fate was preparing something for him. A night, an invitation, a moment that would pull him back into the light he once owned. Life was about to bring him to a place where the world would judge him again, mock him again, challenge him again. But also a place where one final song would rewrite everything. His life continued quietly, like a book left half-closed on a shelf. Days passed softly, predictable. Every morning he made tea, looked out the window, watched people go to work, children laugh, cars pass. Life moved like music in the distance, close enough to hear but too far to touch. He had accepted this slow rhythm even if it never felt like home. Then one afternoon, while sorting old letters and memories, he found a sealed white envelope. It was new, addressed to him in elegant writing. His hands paused midair. He opened it gently, the way one opens a secret. Inside was an invitation to an elite evening party hosted by a wealthy family. The same family who once invited him regularly when he was famous. The same halls where he once played with pride and glory. The same people who once applauded him like he was untouchable. He stared at the card for a long moment. His heart felt strange, pulled in two directions. Part of him wanted to tear the invitation apart. Why return to a world that once loved him only when he shone? Why walk back into rooms where he was no longer celebrated? But another part of him whispered softly, "Go." Not for them, not for applause, not for revenge. Go to remember who you once were. He thought about it for hours. He paced the room, sat down, stood again, held the invitation under the light as if searching for hidden meaning. His heart beat faster than it had in years. He finally decided he would go, not dressed as the man he used to be, but simply as himself. The evening of the party arrived with soft golden lights glowing through mansion windows. Expensive cars lined the driveway. Laughter and classical music spilled from inside like perfume. The world he left behind was still alive, glittering, effortless, beautiful. He wore a simple suit, not new but well kept. His hair was neatly combed, though a few strands of silver revealed his years. As he stepped inside, the smell of polished wood and champagne flooded his senses. For a moment, he was young again, stepping into applause, into light, into belonging. But that moment passed quickly. People noticed him, but not like before. Their eyes didn't light up with admiration. Instead, they widened with surprise, confusion, curiosity. He heard subtle whispers like wind brushing against glass. "Isn't that him? He used to play so well. I thought he disappeared." Their voices were soft but sharp enough to pierce. He forced a gentle smile, nodding politely to those who greeted him with practiced kindness. The kind of kindness that hides judgment behind polite words. Some shook his hand warmly, others with cold fingers and tighter smiles as if acknowledging a ghost. He moved slowly through the hall, observing grand chandeliers, silk gowns, violinists playing in the corner. Everything looked perfect, but perfection felt empty without purpose. He felt like a man walking through the ruins of his own greatness. He found a seat near the edge of the room, watching people dance and laugh. They talked about business, new musicians, young performers shining on stage, the same world he once ruled. He listened quietly, heart heavy but calm. He no longer belonged here, but he didn't run. He stayed, breathing in memories and reality together. Then his eyes fell on something across the hall. A grand piano, polished, shining, waiting. He froze, his breath caught in his chest. For a long moment, everything else faded, the music, the talks, the lights. Only the piano remained, like an old friend calling his name after years of silence. Was it coincidence, destiny, a cruel joke? He didn't know. He only knew his heart began to beat like a drum, too fast, too loud. His hands twitched slightly, wanting to play but afraid. What if he couldn't anymore? What if the world saw weakness instead of art? He closed his eyes to steady himself, but then someone spoke from behind him, a sharp voice, loud enough for others to hear. "Oh look, the once famous pianist has arrived. Maybe he should play for us if he still remembers how." Laughter followed, soft at first, then growing. He opened his eyes slowly. His chest stung, but his expression remained calm. He turned to face them, smiling faces, mocking eyes, people who had applauded him once but now found entertainment in doubt. He said nothing. He only nodded politely and walked away, not toward the exit but deeper into the hall, closer to the piano. A part of him began to wake up. A part he thought was gone forever. He didn't know it yet, but this evening, this moment would lead him back to music, back to himself, back to a final song that would silence every mocking voice in the room. The same people who laughed would soon stand frozen in awe. Because sometimes greatness doesn't die. It only waits for one last performance. People continued mingling around him with sparkling glasses in hand, unaware of the storm building slowly inside him. He stood near a table of shining crystalware, trying to appear relaxed, but his heart felt heavy, not from anger but from the sting of memories. Memories of cheers turned into chuckles, respect turning into ridicule. He heard the whispers again, "His time is over. Didn't he quit after that injury? Poor man, he used to be brilliant." The words floated through the air like sharp needles. No one said them to his face, but everyone said them loudly enough for him to hear. They did not mock him directly, they mocked his silence, his age, his absence from the stage. He lifted a glass of water, hoping to hide the tremble in his hand. He looked at people who once stood in long lines to watch him perform. Now they walked past him as if he were just another guest, nothing special, nothing remarkable. Fame had turned into memory and memory into casual conversation. He tried to smile, to act unaffected, but inside he felt something twisting. Not anger, something deeper. Sadness mixed with disappointment and a quiet voice asking, was this what he had become? A forgotten story, a name people laughed about over champagne. As he stood there, a group approached him, 4 men in suits, confident and loud in their tone. They were younger musicians, rising stars of the present generation. One of them, tall and smirking, greeted him with false politeness. "Sir, it's an honor to finally meet the legend," he said, but the tone carried sharpness instead of respect. "We've heard so much about your career, truly inspiring." The others chuckled under their breath. He replied calmly, "I am glad the music still lives in your generation." But they weren't there for praise, they were there for entertainment. Another young pianist raised an eyebrow and said, "We grew up hearing about you, but we never heard you play live. Must have been something magical back then." Then came the sting. But I guess time changes everything, right? What? A ripple of laughter echoed around him. He felt his heart tighten, but his voice remained steady. Yes, he replied softly, time changes everything. The young men moved away, satisfied with their little performance. But the pianist stood frozen, not because their words hurt, but because a forgotten flame inside him flickered awake. He turned again toward the grand piano across the hall. Its glossy black surface reflected the room like a mirror, as if asking him, "Are you really finished? Or are you just afraid to try again?" He walked slowly toward it, each step heavy with old memories. He felt people's eyes on him, curious, amused, waiting. Some whispered again, this time louder. Is he actually going to play? What if he fails? This should be interesting. Their words no longer hurt, they shaped something inside him. They pushed him forward, because sometimes a person needs doubt around them to remember who they are. He reached the piano and stood there quietly. His fingers hovered over the smooth surface just above the keys. The hall noise slowly dimmed as people noticed his presence. Conversations softened, heads turned, and soon nearly every eye was on him. He sat down, not as a broken musician, not as a forgotten name, but as a man reclaiming breath. His hands trembled at first, the keys felt colder than he remembered, heavier, unfamiliar. But then, as he placed his fingers gently on them, he felt something he had not felt in years. Connection. The same connection that once made the world listen. He looked up briefly and saw smirks, raised eyebrows, waiting eyes. People leaned in, anticipating failure like entertainment. They didn't believe in him, not anymore. But belief was no longer needed. Because the piano believed, because music believed, because deep inside he still believed. A hush fell over the hall, the kind of hush that happens right before history decides to speak. He closed his eyes, he took a long, slow breath, and for the first time in years. He pressed a key, just one, soft, trembling but alive, and the entire room fell silent. The single note from the piano floated through the grand hall like a quiet breath. It was soft, fragile, almost shy, but it did something no loud words could do. It silenced every whisper. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. People slowly turned, eyes fixed on him as if time itself stopped to listen. He could hear his own heartbeat between the echoes of the sound. For a moment he didn't know if he should continue. His fingers hovered, the room watching like a jury. Some faces waited with curiosity, some with hidden amusement. Others simply wanted to witness a fall, a once great man failing in public. He pressed another note, then another. The beginning was shaky. His hands remembered the path, but his muscles felt stiff, like doors opening after years of rust. The melody started slow, unsteady, searching for strength. People exchanged glances, some biting back smirks as if thinking we were right. He's not what he used to be. Someone near the back whispered just loud enough. Look at him, he's struggling. A quiet ripple of laughter followed. He heard every sound, but he didn't stop. He took a slow breath and continued, allowing the keys to guide him gently, letting his heart speak through hesitation. The room grew quiet again, but now the silence felt heavier. Not out of admiration, but expectation. They were waiting for a mistake, waiting for collapse, waiting for the moment they could laugh openly. He reached a difficult passage, fast runs, full of quick transitions. Years ago his fingers ran through it like wind. Now they stumbled, two notes slipped. A sharp sound broke the melody like a crack in glass. Someone chuckled, another smirked. A few eyes sparkled with cruel amusement. This was the humiliation they came for. He felt a sting behind his ribs, sharp and familiar, like the first wound of insecurity all over again. His fingers paused above the keys. His throat tightened. His vision blurred slightly. It would have been easier to stop, to close the piano and walk away, to pretend he never tried. But then he thought of the man he used to be, the man who played for thousands, the man who believed music could heal, could speak, could live. He remembered applause like thunder, faces shining, hearts moved. That part of him was not dead, only buried. Waiting, he exhaled slowly. His fingers touched the keys again, not with fear now, but with pain. And pain, when allowed to speak, becomes something powerful. He continued playing, even if imperfect, even if trembled. Every mistake was real, every note honest. And slowly something changed in the air. The laughter softened, the smirks faded. People leaned closer, not because the performance was perfect, but because it was human. Still, some guests twisted their lips, whispering, "He's fallen, this is sad to watch. He should have refused to play, it's embarrassing. His time is gone, let the young ones shine." He could feel those words like cold rain on his skin, yet he refused to stop. He wasn't playing to prove anything to them, he was playing to remember himself. A man nearby spoke loudly, voice full of challenge. "Play something strong if you still can." Laughter rose again. That was the moment many expected him to break, to stand up and leave defeated. Instead, he lifted his gaze slowly and said softly, "I haven't played in many years. A few mistakes do not erase a lifetime of music." His voice was shaky but steady enough to hold dignity. The hall fell silent once more, not in admiration but in confusion. They didn't expect him to answer. They expected shame, not courage. He positioned his hands again, and this time he didn't play like a man proving something. He played like a man remembering who he was. The notes became steadier, clearer, warmer. His fingers loosened like old wings stretching after a long winter. The melody gained breath, then strength, then soul. It was no longer about perfection. It was about the heart behind each key. And the room listened. Every smirk disappeared, every whisper died. Even those who mocked him felt something shift, a strange pull, like emotion they didn't ask for. The music was waking memories in them too. Memories of dreams they once had, battles they once fought, beauty they once believed in. For the first time that evening, the hall wasn't judging, it was witnessing. The humiliation that was meant to break him instead became the spark that reignited everything inside him. He was still shaking, he was still imperfect, but he was alive, musically, deeply, brilliantly alive. And they could no longer look away. The room was no longer filled with laughter. No one whispered now. They watched him with a silence so deep that even the soft pedal of the piano sounded loud. The music was changing, like a slow storm forming under calm skies. His fingers moved gently but with purpose. He was not rushing, he was not showing off. He was simply speaking in the only language he knew best. He finished the short piece softly, letting the final note fade like a sigh. He did not bow, he did not look around to search for approval. He only sat still, breathing, remembering, feeling. For a long moment no one moved. Then someone clapped once, politely. A few others followed, unsure, slow. It was not thunder, it was not standing applause. It was quiet and uncomfortable, like people unsure whether to praise or judge. He gave a small nod and stepped away from the piano, returning to a lonely corner of the room. His heart was calm but not happy. The music had returned to him, but the pain of silence remained. He had played but not yet spoken. Something inside him still felt unfinished, like a sentence missing its final word. He sat down and stared at his hands. They trembled slightly, warm from playing yet heavy from doubt. He wondered if coming here was a mistake. Maybe they were right, maybe his time had passed. Maybe he should have stayed home with memories that didn't hurt. But then something very unexpected happened. An older woman approached him slowly with soft eyes. She had watched him years ago when he filled concert halls. She placed a gentle hand on his arm and whispered, "You still have it." Just 4 words, but they felt like light in a dark room. His eyes widened and he inhaled deeply, the warmth spreading in his chest like welcome fire. Before he could respond, a younger man joined, a violinist, someone who once performed as a beginner under the shadow of his greatness. The man smiled sincerely and said, "Play again, truly play, not to remind us but to remind yourself." He looked between them, surprised. They were not mocking. They were asking, almost begging, for the pianist they once knew. The pianist who played not for applause but for soul. More people began gathering near the piano, curiosity slowly turning into hope. The room changed. It was no longer a hall of judgment. It was becoming a stage, fragile, waiting, hungry for something real. He looked at the piano again. This time it did not feel like an enemy. It felt like a door, and on the other side was the version of himself he missed for so long. He stood up, slowly, carefully, like standing after years of sitting. The guests turned toward him again, unsure of what would happen next. The earlier mockers now watched quietly, perhaps afraid, perhaps ashamed, perhaps curious to see whether the flame they tried to blow out could burn brighter still. He walked back to the piano, not pushed, not pressured, but drawn. His reflection shimmered on the polished black surface, older but still present, still real. He sat down and let his fingers hover above the keys once more. This time he did not hesitate. He closed his eyes, inhaled deep, and let memories wash over him, the roar of crowds, the heat of stage lights, the softness of applause, the innocence of youth, the tragedy of silence. He prepared himself not just to play, but to feel, because music without emotion is empty. And tonight, emotion was overflowing. The audience leaned forward as if their hearts were being pulled by invisible strings. Even those who insulted him earlier felt the weight of the moment. The room braced itself, a calm before something powerful, something unforgettable. His breath steadied. His eyes stayed closed. His soul opened like a book. And then, he pressed the first key of a new song. Not trembling this time, not broken, but rising like a storm finally ready to rain. The first note of the new song was not quiet this time. It was bold, confident. It carried weight, like a man returning to his throne after years of exile. The hall that once mocked him now held its breath as if afraid to miss a single sound. He played slowly at first, letting each note settle like raindrops on dry earth. Then the melody began to grow layer by layer. His fingers started moving faster, stronger, not rushed, not forced, but guided by something deeper than memory, guided by soul. The room changed. Memory, guided by soul. The room changed. People who stood casually before now stepped closer without realizing. Conversations died mid-sentence. Laughter dissolved like smoke, wine glasses lowered slowly in frozen hands. It was as if the music wrapped around every person in the hall and told them quietly, "Listen." He remembered who he was. Every key he pressed awakened a part of him that had been asleep for years, the fire, the passion, the hunger to speak through sound. His injury, his silence, his doubts, none of them mattered here. On the piano bench he was whole again. The melody suddenly shifted into something fierce, fast, alive. His fingers flew like wind sweeping across open fields. The storm inside him burst into thunder, and yet it was beautiful, controlled chaos. Power made gentle through art. Gasps spread across the hall. People stared, eyes wide, mouths parted. Some clutched the edges of tables. Some forgot to breathe. Even those who mocked him earlier stood still now, as if the music itself told them to be silent. This was not just a performance. This was a man reclaiming his voice. Years of pain lived in those notes, the ache of lost fame, the weight of forgotten applause, the loneliness of quiet rooms. But alongside the pain was something else, hope. The hope that talent never truly dies. That art survives even after hands grow old. That a heart filled with music cannot be silenced forever. His hands moved to the slow part of the song, gentle, soft, almost like a lullaby to his younger self. The audience felt it. Their eyes softened, some blinked back unexpected tears. The song wasn't just being heard, it was being lived. He thought of the night he first performed as a young man, filled with excitement instead of fear. He thought of the faces in the crowd back then, shining, believing in him. He thought of every moment music gave him life. His chest tightened, but not with sadness, with gratitude. By the time he reached the final movement, the room was no longer the same. It wasn't a party anymore, it was a concert. It wasn't a group of critics, it was an audience witnessing history. His fingers rose for the climax, and the music exploded, powerful, bright, unstoppable. It soared, reaching corners of the hall that laughter could never reach. People felt it deep inside, like their own forgotten dreams were being played through his hands. For a moment he wasn't old, he wasn't forgotten, he was infinite. And when the final note came, long, trembling, glowing like sunrise, the room did not move. No one clapped, no one breathed. It was a silence thick with awe, like the world had paused to honor him. Then someone exhaled sharply. Another wiped their eyes, and finally applause erupted, not slow, not polite, thunderous. Hands clapped hard and loud. Chairs scraped the floor as people stood up. Voices rose in disbelief, admiration, shame for ever doubting him. The same hall that laughed at him minutes ago now looked at him with shining eyes and open hearts. He closed his eyes and let the applause wash over him like warm rain after drought. His fingers rested gently on the keys, no longer shaking. He felt alive, whole, seen. He did not need trophies anymore. He did not need fame. He only needed this music flowing from his heart, reaching others, returning home to him. And it did. He stood slowly, bowing with humility, not triumph. People pushed forward to shake his hand, to apologize, to praise. Even those who mocked him earlier couldn't meet his eyes, but their silence was apology enough. He looked at the piano one last time that night, his longest friend, his oldest language. One final song had changed everything. But the story wasn't only about music. It was about a man rediscovering himself. He left the hall not as a fallen artist, but as the pianist he had always been. And the world walked behind him, humbled. The applause went on longer than anyone expected. It rolled through the hall like ocean waves, crashing and rising again each time it seemed to settle. People weren't only clapping for the music, they were clapping because something inside them had shifted. The man they once doubted had reminded them what real greatness looked like. He stood quietly, accepting the applause with gentle eyes instead of pride. His heart felt full, not swollen. He didn't feel like a star, he felt like a man who had finally come home to himself. Slowly, guests approached him, not with smirks but with soft smiles and lowered eyes like children who understood they misbehaved. A younger musician stepped forward, one of the men who laughed earlier. His voice trembled slightly. "I was wrong about you," he said. "I thought your time was gone. I didn't know you still carried that kind of soul." The pianist didn't reply with anger or dismissal. He simply placed a hand on the young man's shoulder and replied calmly, "It's easy to forget what silence holds." The young musician nodded, eyes watery, humbled in ways pride couldn't hide. One by one others followed, some apologizing openly, others just offering a handshake or a quiet bow. The very people who mocked him were now the ones speechless before him. But the most meaningful moment came from someone unexpected, the host of the party, a wealthy man known for his pride more than kindness. He walked up slowly, every step heavy with recognition of his own cruelty. He looked into the pianist's eyes and said, not loudly but honestly, "You reminded us that talent doesn't age. I misjudged you, forgive me." The pianist smiled, not to show superiority but to show peace. "Music forgives where people struggle," he replied gently. Around them, guests listened in silence, absorbing every word. The party had transformed into something sacred. No one spoke carelessly now, no one mocked. Every pair of eyes carried admiration, the kind that grows only after being proven wrong. A woman approached next, elderly, elegant, her voice shaking with emotion. She held his hand with both of hers and whispered, "I used to come to your concerts with my husband. We cried every time you played. Tonight I felt that feeling again." Her words hit him deep, like a soft wind blowing open old memories. He bowed his head slightly and replied, "Thank you for remembering." She smiled through tears. The room was full of faces, some humbled, some touched, some changed forever. One by one, people thanked him not just for his performance, but for reminding them that art is not measured by age, popularity, or perfection, but by honesty. Even in silence, the audience stood still, as if the music still lived in the air, too beautiful to disturb. Some didn't sit down for minutes, unable to break the spell. Conversations resumed only slowly, softly, with the same piano now glowing like a witness to redemption. Later, as the party continued around him, he stood near a window looking out into the quiet night. The moonlight reflected on his eyes, and he wondered how one evening could carry so much: humiliation, pain, memory, and triumph, all within a single song. He realized something important then. People did not laugh because he was weak. They laughed because they forgot strength could return. He didn't reclaim his place by shouting or proving. He reclaimed it by playing, by letting music speak in a language the heart never forgets. Across the room, someone was watching him quietly. Not a guest, not a critic. A young girl, maybe 16 or 17, holding onto a small notebook with sheet music tucked inside. Her eyes sparkled the same way his once did when he was young. She stepped forward timidly. "Sir," she said softly, voice shaking like a thin string, "will you teach me?" Her question was simple, but it washed over him like sunrise. Out of everything that happened that night, the applause, the respect, the regret, this was the greatest gift. Not praise, not recognition. Legacy. He knelt to her height and smiled warmly, tears silently gathering at the corner of his eyes. "I will," he whispered, "if you promise to play with your heart, not for applause." She nodded, understanding more than she could express. That night was no longer about humiliation. It was about rebirth. About music passing from one soul to another. The crowd that once laughed stood still, not because they were told to, but because they witnessed a life return to itself. A forgotten pianist became unforgettable again. And the night was not ending, it was beginning. The night ended, but its echoes lived like music inside every person who had witnessed it. Long after the applause faded and the guests returned to their polished lives, one truth remained unmistakable. They would never forget the man who turned embarrassment into brilliance. He stepped out of the mansion sometime after midnight. The sky was calm, deep blue, sprinkled with cold stars that looked like piano notes scattered across the night. He walked slowly, not because he was tired, but because he wanted to feel every moment, the soft breeze, the weight leaving his chest, the quiet satisfaction of a story unbroken. For years he had believed his song was over. But tonight proved something beautiful. Some songs don't end, they just pause. He reached home, placed his coat aside, and sat before his silent piano. This time he did not stare, he did not hesitate. He lifted the lid and let his fingers rest gently on the keys, like greeting an old friend he finally found again. He played not for an audience, not for applause, not for memory. He played for himself. And the music that came was peaceful, calm, like a river flowing through a heart that had finally healed. His hands no longer shook. They moved with quiet certainty, as if age never mattered and time never stole anything. Morning sunlight touched his face as he played. He did not notice how long the hours passed. He was lost in sound, in freedom, in rediscovery. For the first time in many years, his heart felt young. The knock on his door came gently. He looked up, and there she stood, the young girl from the party, clutching her notebook like a promise. Her eyes were bright, hopeful, nervous. Behind her, her parents waited respectfully. She bowed her head slightly. "I want to learn," she said again, voice firmer this time. He smiled, not the smile of a performer, the smile of a teacher. He invited her inside. Days became lessons. Mornings filled with scales, afternoons with melody. He guided her softly, not pushing, not rushing. He taught her the same way life had taught him, with patience and feeling. She stumbled, improved, stumbled again, but every mistake made her music warmer, deeper. One afternoon, she paused mid-practice and asked him, "How do you make music feel alive?" He closed his eyes, remembering crowds, lights, loss, return. "Play like you're speaking to someone who can't hear words," he answered. "Play what you cannot say." And she understood. Time passed, seasons changed, but something stayed constant, the sound of two pianists in a small home, one rediscovering, one beginning. Soon, people in town began to hear whispers of a miracle, the forgotten pianist teaching a rising star. More students came, then small concerts, then documentary invitations. His story spread not as gossip but as inspiration. Not because he returned to glory, but because he returned to himself. Years later, he stood backstage again, not as a performer, but as a mentor. His student stood at the center of a great hall, hands poised above the piano, calm and ready. The audience waited wide-eyed just as once they waited for him. He watched from the shadows, pride swelling like quiet thunder. When she played, he heard himself, not the notes, but the heart behind them. And he knew, without doubt, his story had not ended on that night of mockery. It had only turned the page. Her final note rang out like dawn breaking open the sky. The crowd stood, applauded, cried. And he smiled, not needing to take the stage. His music, his soul, his legacy echoed through her hands. He walked out into the hallway slowly, softly, as if leaving behind a chapter complete. A few recognized him, nodded with respect, but he did not stay for praise. He stepped into the night, into peace, into purpose. He no longer needed the world to remember him. His music would remember for him. In the end, it was not fame that defined him. It was one final song, a song that changed everything. Song that changed everything.